So The Advocate, let's just get right into this series on Pure Flix. Where did the inspiration for The Advocate come from?
I mean, obviously, Holy Spirit, but it has been a whirlwind. The idea originally came in 2000, like 6 or 7 when I was living in New York City. I wasn't a believer, and neither was the person who brought this idea to me. And I just thought that the show wouldn't be picked up. I felt like at that time the world wasn't ready for it yet. It's an amazing project about a child protective agent who has supernatural gifts to be able to get ahead of the bad guys, get ahead of the predators. But at that time, projects like that just weren't being done. They weren't being made. They were often blocked. Um, and then fast forward to 2020, I felt like the gloves were off. We could really be free. And I felt like people were hungry for the truth. I felt that they wanted projects that really mattered. And I felt like they were going to respond to both which now it ended up being, not just supernatural gifts, but all gifts from the Holy Spirit. So she falls off a bridge when she's trying to get one of her kids that has jumped off this bridge, and she comes out of the water with gifts of visions, discernment of spirits, and dreams. So at that point, she's operating in a different way and she can get ahead of the predators through knowing what's going on. So she teams up with the human trafficking unit and they kind of go from there. So the story was twofold. I wanted people to be empowered in the Holy Spirit to be able to use those gifts because I feel like a lot of times in society that gets suppressed. That original gifting that we have, I feel like people kind of explain it away or they push it down and don't use that gut, which is that gut instinct, letting you know when you're safe, when you're not, how you need to move, when you need to move, and just really being able to respond to that. And then the second part was I wanted to prevent and have awareness against these predators, which is in every state in this country now. And I wanted people to feel edified and educated and, actually encouraged about it instead of afraid.
Well, it's interesting too that your character, right, has these abilities, and we don't often talk a lot about spiritual gifts, even in churches. These things are not often talked about in society, as you were saying. So it's an interesting sort of twist on this. And you directed this. You also play Amber, who is this child protective agent. Were you able to pull from real life experience, and if so, how? How did you come up with the ideas for these episodes?
Sure. So they're all inspired by true events. We spent about a year with SVU units, human trafficking units, and such. But my mom actually was a detective my whole life. She was a child abuse investigator. Then she was a PI. She ended up bounty hunting and worked in law enforcement, both in the state sector and private. So growing up, we kind of were a revolving door because my mom cared so much about the vulnerable, and there were a lot of kids that would come in and they would tell me their secrets, and I was just around a lot of that. And then also I felt that along the way I've been exposed to, from a very young age, to a lot of evils in the world, from the time that, my father tried to kill my mom and me before I was born, and then I was in hiding for, a good period of time. And then when I went into school, when I was a kid, we actually ended up bringing down a predator when I was 8 or 9 years old that had abused my best friend. And it ended up being about 100 kids. So that ended up becoming the first episode. And I think it took me, I feel like the enemy had robbed me of so many years of understanding where God was in all of that and how much he loved me and how much healing he could do, and that he was actually using that to give me a voice to be able to help so many now.
Well, that is, I mean, you shared so much there. I mean, I want to kind of go back to your mom and your dad. No, I mean, in such a small amount of time, you shared so much, and your dad and your mom and that dynamic. So your mother and you almost being killed by your father.
Mhm.
How, I mean, that alone, before any of the other things, is a very traumatic detail to know. How have you processed through and dealt with that over the years?
Well, and that's what's so interesting is that, I feel like before Jesus, I really didn't. In fact, I don't even think I had processed that it was a thing, especially since it had happened, so young, even before I was born. And then those first couple years of my life, which are the most formative. I think you just kind of have a very much like moving on type of mentality, and you don't realize or understand the effects that it has on you. And that's what's so great about my conversion to Christ, is that he's able to go into those areas and show you what needs to be healed, and show you what, what the effects of it really are. And yeah, his saving power and his ability to move in a person's life and to literally make you into a new creation, that those traumas can be used not only for good, but that can actually be healed and turned into a healthy life, a happy life. That's, I think, so crucial, and I think that is the message for Christ. He promises to make us white as snow, to make us new. He makes all things new, right?
Yeah. Well, and as you're talking about this, and you mentioned when this idea for the advocate, again, this is the series on Pure Flix right now. When this idea came to you, you were not a believer yet. So how did you, find Christ? What was that path for you?
Oh my goodness. I was actually I was making just a lot of different things in Hollywood. I mean, I was making horror movies, fight films. I was making, and that was the thing, is I think that my background and the things that I had seen were coming out in my work. There was a lot of violence in my work. There was a lot of things that I just thought I was telling stories and entertaining people, when I was drawn to that. And I'm on the red carpet in 2009 in this handmade gown in the Cannes Film Festival, and I'm thinking like I finally arrived because I'm, producing this movie. And anyways, I'm standing there and I have this unbelievable out of body experience where I'm looking out at the world, and I know that this is supposed to be a moment where I'm happy and the world is like my oyster type of thing. And aren't we special? And it was the exact opposite. And I had never felt so empty, so lost, unhappy, like all the opposite feelings of and it's like the world lied to me. Wait a second. This
And you
is
were on the red carpet. What was it about that experience that made that come out of you suddenly?
it was a Woody Allen premiere, and I like to say God can come, the Holy Spirit can come anywhere. I think at that time I had the year before, I had people that I had encountered that were Christians, and that I think people were just collectively and separately praying for me to have that kind of like scales off moment. And that's what it was. And I think it was when I went into the bathroom to kind of collect myself, and I looked into the mirror and no one was staring back at me. And it's there were so many things in Hollywood that I didn't do, that were on the scale of the things that I could have done that were quote unquote bad or evil. But I think it was just the idolatry that the film industry was my God, and that I needed to make them happy, as opposed to having that relationship with God. He's my creator. And on top of that, the gifts are from God. Okay, those gifts are not my gifts to use for myself, or what they were being used for without me realizing it was for the enemy's work. And I think God, I mean, God can do what he wants to do. When he comes upon you, he pulled me out and said, "You're working for me now." And I just remember like running in this silver gown, like in a movie, like to the airport, trying to get to a church. I just knew I needed to find a church.
So
And
it was like an immediate thing for you. I mean, it was a really immediate recognition for you.
Oh, yeah, and like I said, I think the year leading up to this,
Right.
there were seeds planted. There was a lot of experiences that I was having that were already, letting me know wrong direction, and it just that was the moment that it clicked. I mean, really, really clicked.
And so here you are now, you've got this series, you've moved into that direction of telling, these inspirational stories. What are you hoping people take away from The Advocate?
Well, what I love about The Advocate, and I think the reason why it's been so successful and has been in the top 5 for the past 6 weeks and actually hit number 1 last weekend, I think it's because, we don't show anything. We don't show abuse. We don't most of these projects, they show that. And ours is every episode has safety tips. Every episode is coming into your with family friendly stuff. We've got horses and dogs and kids. And while the subject matter is a difficult matter, my understanding from everyone that's come forward is that we're telling it in a way that makes people feel like empowered, enlightened, educated, encouraged, edified. Those are the things that we're getting. So, really, we're here to save lives,
You
like
know, and I,
stopping it before.
well, and I, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to go back to your mom because that to me, here you are, you're getting to play this role. You've lived all of these things that have sort of helped piece together this puzzle that brought you to this place. Um, what did you glean from your mom's experience all those years watching her? How much of that were you able to build into your character?
There is so much built into the character that I didn't even realize, and you may not know this, but I was not supposed to play Amber. I was not supposed to be in the show. It was actually 5 hours before we started filming
Oh
that
wow! Oh wow!
it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and we started filming at 6 AM, and I had hired 4 great, fabulous actresses, some known, some not known, and every we had a 63-person cast, but this role kept falling out. And so it literally was just it poured out of me. It was just natural. I didn't study for it. I didn't plan it. I had none of it, and it was just even my movements, were pieces of my mom and how she was on the job because she was very different on the job than she was at home. And we show that in the show. We've got family life versus work life and the difference. So, yeah, it just,
And that's
you
a
know,
job that probably has an effect on you, I would imagine, as a human being. It's not an easy job.
you know what? It had a very strong effect on me as a child too. I mean, I think that in some ways I saw too much, I knew too much early on, but then I look at the same thing and I was saved from so many situations of being taken or being abused for years because of the awareness that I had and the quick thinking because of watching my mom, because of my awareness of that evil. And I think that that's really what we want to portray in this show is, trust that gut, watch your surroundings. I mean, there's so many safety tips that are helping people in it. Very, very important little easy things not to be afraid of, but that you can just incorporate into your daily life, which will literally save your life.
Well, Nicole, I so appreciate you taking the time. The series is The Advocate. It's streaming right now on Pure Flix. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.